Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to the December 3rd ProfessionalVMware.com vBrownbag. Tonight we have the man himself, first-timer Jonathan Frappier, who will be discussing VMware Application Services, formerly AppD. As a matter of fact, he's also going to be doing a live demo. So let's hope he's sacrificed some sort of chicken or goat to the demo gods. I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus. We're just going to take care of some show notes and pass it on to Jonathan. So some quick notes. You can follow the vBrownbag at the various Twitter accounts and join in on the conversation using the hashtag. You can also use the GoToMeeting window to ask questions or leave comments as well. Don't forget, we also have other podcasts going on globally. Again, I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus. You can find me on Twitter at Ahmad_Yunus. We also have a co-host on tonight, Brandon Wilmot. So he'll be assisting as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Jonathan now.
Cool. Thank you very much. And before we get started on the show, I'm just waiting for this draft post to officially publish, and let's take a look at that. It's that time of year again, folks. It's the annual vBrownbag end-of-year giveaway. We've got a lot of great sponsors this year and a lot of great prizes, so thank you to all of our sponsors. We've got Synology, who has given us a DS413 Plus for our contest. I'll be including two terabyte drives for that unit. Usually they normally ship with no drives in there, and I don't want somebody to get a holiday present with no drives to play with, so that'll come with two terabyte drives. HP has given us two HP microservers as well for your home lab enjoyment, and ClearPath has also given us the go-ahead for two home lab kits. So these will be roughly the 3.5 gigahertz 6-core AMD processor with 32 gigs of RAM. Exact specs may change by shipping time, but should be at least that. SSD drives in there, and a nice small form factor case as well. So we'll have two of those. We'll have 8 winners getting a 120 gig Micron SSD drive. Add that to your home lab, your laptop, whatever you want. Get a nice little performance boost, maybe do some vSAN testing. I know that's next up for me. EMC Education Services has given us a DVD kit that's got 3 training DVDs on there. So for those folks that want to earn their Cloud Architect Expert certification, you'll have all the materials to study for that certification series. There's 3 tests in there. I completed that back in September or October or so. Nick Marshall and Cody Bunch have generously donated books to the contest, so we'll have 5 winners win a signed, obviously print copy of Mastering vSphere 5.5, and we'll also have 5 winners win an ebook, and 2 winners of the OpenStack Cloud Computing Cookbook 2nd edition. And Veeam, once again this year, has also generously donated one of their famous swag bags. So that blog post should be out by now, hopefully on the Twitters. Look at that. It is out. Form is there. We'll be running the contest through December 16th, and we'll announce all the winners on December 17th on our last show of 2014. So get your forms in, share it out, retweet the link, and you'll hear on the 17th about your prizes. With that, that's actually the reason why everyone probably came, but now what's left is application services. I never use PowerPoint. So again, my name's Jonathan Frappier. You can find me at jfrappier on Twitter. Tonight we're going to be talking about VMware Application Services, and as Ahmad mentioned, this is formerly known as Application Director, or AppD. So quick who am I for the folks that catch the recording or the slides once we post them. I'm a community guy. 2-time vExpert, EMC elect, recent Cisco champion, and also Pernix Pro. I've got my VCP and VCAP DCD. You can find me at birdexpert.com, different social media sites. I think that's actually a Tumblr icon, not a Twitter icon, my bad. Before we do get started, I do want to state that I'm not an expert, as you can clearly see from this slide. I have managed to draw 7 red lines, some in green ink, some in transparent ink, but I've not got them to be all perpendicular, so I may not have all of the answers to your questions, but if you have them, I'm more than happy to look them up and test things out in my lab environment. So what I'm going to go over today, some of the basics of application services, how to get it set up, how to publish blueprints from application services to vRealize Automation or vCloud Automation Center, and we'll do some live demo at the end on how to set that up and also run one of those blueprints and see it hopefully published successfully, because I did not actually give anything to the computer gods before this live demo. So before we get started specifically with application services, I thought it'd be good to talk about why do we want to automate. And I'm sure plenty of people have seen this diagram about automation. We can do things manually. If you're asking for my opinion, which I guess is why you're here listening, installing software is not adding any value to your business. There's things that as engineers, administrators, architects that we could be doing to help drive the business forward with technology. Installing software is pretty boring in the grand scheme of the world. Even if you're a software as a service provider or a hosting provider of some sorts where you're doing a lot of software installations, that's really not what your business is about. You want to make sure that your customers have access to the software. So let's automate that and get it working consistently through automation so that you can move on to more important tasks. If you're not automating, I don't think that you could actually say that you are truly secure. So if you've not automated the software installations that you need to do, whether it's every day, every week, every month, once a year, if you've not automated and tested those things, there's no way that you can really tell that there hasn't been some form of human error somewhere in that stack, in that process. By automating your software installation, whether it's a script, whether it's through some other service, whether it's through application services, it allows you to go through, test the software installation, find out if there's problems, find out if there's bugs, update those automation routines, and know that you're pushing out an application that's exactly as you want it with no room for human error. So automation is also a very important piece to ensure security. So what is application services? So application services allows us to build blueprints for applications. Typically, most applications have some form of dependency, whether that's a .NET requirement or a PowerShell or SQL or IIS or Apache, something along those lines. There's different components that are generally needed for an application to work. So application services allows us to make that blueprint, much like we were building, some other complex system, whether it's the Millennium Falcon or a building or whatever, and make sure that we've got all those components defined and can be followed. This is typically something done by a release engineering group, maybe called a DevOps group or whatnot now if they're trying to have a more trendy title for their group. But really it's about the automation and standardization of provisioning your software, upgrading your software, rolling it back if there's a problem, and taking it down when you are done with that application. Maybe you've got engineering or QA groups that need to test software over and over again. With application services, we can build this blueprint so that they can go and do it the exact same way every single time. The rollback piece is actually fairly important. I've been at companies in the past. I've been at a few startups, a few software as a service providers, and we've done upgrades where everything we thought was okay, but we quickly realized that something was missed either in QA or in engineering or as part of the installation process, and we needed to roll that back. We can actually do that as well with application services. These blueprints are reusable, which I'll get to why that's actually important in another slide as well. But once we create the blueprint, we can use these application blueprints to install the software again the exact same way whether we're installing that on-site to our vCloud Automation Center or vSphere environment, or whether we're deploying that to a public cloud provider. So application services supports both of those. So whether we're a private cloud, a public cloud only, or a hybrid where we're mixing those two together, we can use application services to install our software and install it the same way every single time. So that's what application services is. What it's not magic, right? There's a lot of effort that goes into it. We're going to see, hopefully tonight, that deploying application services is actually pretty easy once you know which order to do everything in. But it's not it's not magic. It's not going to just install itself and start working for you. We've actually got to build the application blueprints to do the work for us. So it sounds pretty easy as I'm sitting here talking for 7 or 8 minutes or so. Oh, okay, great. I'll install application services and I'll automate my software installation and I'll go on to more exciting tasks. The reality is that process is quite time intensive. I was at a company once, and the software that we needed to install on a regular basis was, I'll throw 80% out there so we can use that 80-20 rule, but it was probably about 80% automated through the use of various scripts. And then we'd have to go in, test some things, do a little bit of manual configuration, but for the most part, we could run some scripts, walk away, come back when it was done, and we were ready to finish configuration. When we went to go move that and finish that last 20%, we were moving to a different automation tool. It took us about 6 months to take what was already automated and put it into a new automation tool and finish that last 20% of the automation. So even though we already had an idea of what all those processes and steps were, it can take a long time to build your initial application services blueprint, test that, have other groups test it, go back through, catch your errors. You're actually very much in a software development lifecycle type model where you are deploying, testing, and it's an iterative process to keep going through and make sure that you get that application blueprint right. Now, for applications that are fairly static and not changing, you can get to a point where that will be validated and pretty much 100%. When you're dealing with applications that change and may have new requirements down the road, you're going to need to continue that development cycle on your application blueprints to make sure they're working and that everything is installing as you would hope for. Finally, with what application services is not, it's not a solution for everything. I know when I find a new application or new system that I tend to treat it like a hammer for a few weeks, and I try to use it for everything that I've got going on, and I can see use cases for things, but it's important to understand, it's not really a configuration management tool. Again, it's more about release automation, release engineering, automating your software installations. We can do some configuration management through application services to make sure that our virtual machines are in the state we want them to be in order to run the application properly, but I don't know that it's something that I necessarily used for ongoing configuration management. And actually, application services and Puppet have an integration where you can bring in Puppet scripts to help configure your environment, and then later on use Puppet to make sure that your environment's staying in the state you want it to use. You might, again, desktop or end-user computing applications, not something I'd likely use application services for. Actually, we have vBrownbag next week on app volumes. That's probably more likely what I would use for desktop or end-user computing or thin app or some other solution that's built for that. And we're not going to really use it to monitor our applications. We're going to go to vCenter Operations Manager or vRealize Operations or Nagios or some other application monitoring tool. So it's going to be a nice shiny hammer, and everything's going to look like a nice shiny nail once you get comfortable with application services. But just understand that it's not a tool for everything that you're going to be doing out there. And that's really true for any automation tools. You want to find the right use for anything you're using. I've played around with Ansible a bit lately. A great configuration management tool, easy to use. But it's not, the tools are going to be used better together than trying to force everything into one tool. So When you get started with application services, Luigi, this is for you, another Yoda slide. What you should start doing is really unlearning what we've learned throughout all these years, be it from pre-virtualization times when we were on physical servers that move into a virtualized environment, and where we are kind of going today with this whole DevOps movement trend. You start thinking about things differently when you start using this tool. Even if you have scripts that are going to automate your installation of your software packages today, if you're going to move those scripts or that process into application services, take the opportunity to step back and look at what you're actually doing and how you might be able to do it better moving forward, and give yourself more flexibility. So for the most part, we used to, and I know many people still do, think about their VM, their virtual machine, as a thing. This is where that whole pets and cattle story starts to come in. We love our VM. It's got our application installed. It may have data on that virtual machine that we really care about, and we protect that virtual machine. And there are companies that have made a living out of protecting virtual machines. We started a few years ago, once people started getting comfortable with virtualization and moving past needing to maintain those physical servers and kind of treating virtual machines the same way, to separating out the operating systems and the applications. We see this today even more so with Docker and app volumes, and now Rocket from CoreOS, where we can create applications and deploy those on top of the operating system a bit more freely. But what we really ultimately want to do is we want to separate all of those things. We want to have our operating system, but we want that to be disposable. Application services allows us to do that to our application as well. If we can reinstall our software the exact same way and know exactly how it's going to come out, I don't need to spend time troubleshooting application problems or virtual machine problems. I can run my application services blueprint, deploy my virtual machine, my application on top of that, and point back to my data. So we really want to separate out our data, protect our data, make sure we have access to our data, and everything other than that doesn't really matter. If I have a virtual machine that dies and I've called it Pat, I can send Pat off to pasture and whip up Fred. I don't need to worry about what that virtual machine is doing, so long as I've got my data separated and my application can be redeployed and access my data. A few quick differences between application services, which is version 6.1, and application director. So in the release notes, you'll read a line that says application services is now a component of vCloud Automation Center 6.1. When I first read that, I was like, oh, they must have bundled it in, wrapped it into vCloud Automation Center or vRealize Automation. It's very much a completely different thing. You're just going to have to buy it with vRealize Automation now. It's still a separate virtual machine, still separate configuration, still a separate UI, still separate permissions. So even though it says it's a component of vCloud Automation Center 6.1, it's very much separate, managed separate, and deployed separately from everything else. The UI, I think, is much nicer. Now in application services, it was a little dated in AppD, so a little bit nicer to look at. Simplify agent installation. So in application director, to install the agent, you had to go through a lot of manual steps, validate that you had downloaded the correct version of Java, placed it in the correct place, install the software, and now there's simply a script that you can download and run, and it will pull down the appropriate version of Java. It will pull down the application director and vRealize automation agents, install those, put them where it wants to, so there's not a lot of manual effort anymore into installing the agents onto your virtual machines when you get those prepared. Then there's improvements. I mentioned the Puppet integration earlier, improvements in mapping to vCloud Automation Center networks, and improved integration with Puppet. So just a few things there in application services now that have improved over 6.0. A few application services considerations. This is true, I think, really anywhere, and if you've paid attention to my Twitter feed in the last 2 weeks or so, I've probably mentioned NTP at least 10 times. Was looking for something today as well, but NTP is very critical to application services because we're integrating with many other products. We're we're leveraging single sign-on, vCloud Automation Center, and ultimately vSphere, tying all those things together. If time is not in sync, you will run into problems. Initially, I was having trouble when I brought the application services virtual machine up for the first time, the vApp that I deployed. Time hadn't synced properly yet, so it gave me some trouble pulling in business groups. Later on, I accidentally shut down my entire lab environment while I was in the midst of doing something, and again, when it came back, time was out of sync. Looked like things were working, but it just gave me a bad password error message, which seemed really weird because I knew the password was good because I could log in to vCloud Automation Center with that user, and then it clicked that I'm probably having an SSO issue. So I went, checked the time on it, fixed that, and lo and behold, I could log in. So make sure you've got a good NTP server in your environment, whether it's a lab, especially if it's a lab, because if you're testing things, you don't want to be running into problems in your test that may not happen in production, and you don't want to get a bad taste in your mouth because of something that can be fixed with a pretty lightweight virtual machine running one service. Application services, and I forgot to update the slide. It is multi-cloud and multi-OS support. Actually, in 6.0, those were the 3 operating systems that were supported. Now also, we've got SUSE and Ubuntu that are now also supported, and we can deploy to vCloud Hybrid Service or other vCloud Director-powered service providers and Amazon Web Services as well, in addition to our private cloud solution, vCloud Automation Center. Tonight we're going to look specifically at vCloud Automation Center. Maybe I'll do a post in the future on connecting to vCloud Air or AWS. Here are the supported operating systems. A little bit of confusion that I got from the documentation for application services. It says it supports Red Hat Enterprise Linux or CentOS 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and then 6.5. But once we log into application services, you'll actually see that there's no predefined template for 6.5. There is one for 6.4, so I've done all of my testing so far on 6.4. I can tell you that it works. The documentation says 6.5, but not 6.4. I don't know if that was a find and replace problem that somebody had when updating the documentation. So you just want to verify that. I can tell you I did try to do this with CentOS 7, and at least the agent would not install on CentOS 7, so it says up to 6.4 or 6.5 here. If you need the agent installed, you're not going to be able to do that on CentOS 7, at least right now. There's a few other commands you'll need as well. We'll see when we look at building an application blueprint, the scripts that do the work behind the scenes to do things like install Apache will use some of these commands, so that's why these need to be available on the virtual machine, because it's going to go out and it's going to try to do a yum install of certain components. So application service install assumptions. So we've got, we're going to assume we have a working vCenter and single sign-on implementation, vRealize Automation Center deployed with at least one tenant and business group configured. While we're running, I'll run a deployment demo later that takes a few minutes in my lab environment because it's not chock full of speedy things, but while that's running in the background, I'll go through and show you some of the vCloud Automation Center things you need to make sure are configured, and then we'll build an application blueprint environment as well.
Hey, John, you have your first question.
Cool. What's up?
So no HTML5?
No HTML5 for...
Troy, you want to elaborate a little bit more?
I don't believe if it's a UI question, I don't believe the UI is HTML5, but honestly, I've never looked. I can certainly look that up. It's not a requirement anywhere on any of the virtual machines to have that, so you could deploy HTML5 packages if you needed to. If your application was built and you wanted to deploy that through application services, you certainly could. I'll assume that's where the question was going. If you get something more than that, let me know. There's a good chance I'll have to look that up, though.
Yeah, I mean, I figure since it's the same with, well, hold on. I think he just elaborated more. Let's see, there always seems to have a fix on the unsecured Java hars pressed to install this.
Right, so there could be, maybe he's talking about the Java version requirement. So that is, I don't know if you could go beyond 5.1. I know that the agent installation script will specifically pull down this specific version of Java. I'm not sure if you could update that and still have things work properly. I'd have to test that out in my lab. I have not run into any problems right now with this specific version, but I'll take a look at that separately and maybe do a blog post on it or so.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Troy.
We'll want to make sure we have access to vCenter and VMRC because a lot of the initial configuration will be done after the virtual appliance is deployed. We'll connect to the VMRC and we'll see some screenshots of that. I don't want to bore you with OVF deployment for the demo, so it's already deployed in my environment. Plus, it would probably take like 30 minutes in my environment to deploy it and bring it up. But you'll connect to that, answer some questions about your environment, your vCloud Automation Center or vRealize environment, and you need to provide your license key there as well. And then we'll need to make sure that vCloud Automation Center has access to blueprints, which actually map to vSphere templates, so that application director will use that vCloud Automation Center blueprint to deploy the virtual machine and then deploy the application components that we want that are part of the blueprint on top of that virtual machine or in that virtual machine. So this is kind of the basic overview of installing application services. So as I mentioned, it's an OVF. We'll deploy that through vCenter. We'll set our OVF properties, and obviously we want to document that. We document everything as good engineers and architects and admins. Once the OVF is deployed, we'll power that on, and we'll connect to the console. And as you can see here, this is requesting the serial number for vCloud Automation Center. So this is where we'd enter that information. Again, there's a few other questions here that it will ask you. I have a link to my blog post series on this later on. That walks you through all of the different questions that it will ask. Once the appliance is configured, we do need to go in now and, I guess as part of that configuration process, it's going to register itself with vCloud Automation Center. Once that happens, we're going to want to go into vCloud Automation Center and assign some user our application architect roles, and this will allow that user or users to log into application services and start to configure application services and map all of the things that application services wants to our vCloud Automation Center environment. Your user does need to be part of a business group in order to do that. So on my screenshot here, I created a tenant admin user and an IaaS admin user, which are the two main users that will administer your vCloud Automation Center environment, or two main roles rather. So I set those up just so that I could bounce back and forth easily, and I knew if I needed the person with the tenant admin privileges, I would log in as tenant admin. I would log in as the IaaS admin if I needed those privileges. So this could be any user in your environment. You could name them tenant admin, or more likely in a production environment, it's going to be specific people on your team, and you'll just need to document and know who has those permissions. Once my application architect roles are done, now I can log into application services and the things I need to do there, and we'll take a look at this tonight while the blueprint that theoretically works, that it has worked at least once for me so far, is deploying. We'll create a cloud provider, a deployment environment, our logical template, and our application blueprint. So this is where we'll log in to vCloud application services and configure those things. These are some of the sample applications that come with application services if you want to see how blueprints are put together and see some of the things you can do in application services. this is an overview of the deployment steps. Again, we'll go through this in a bit more detail live, but we've got, we're going to map, put application directory there, look at that, application services to our vRealize business groups. We're going to create a deployment environment which maps to a vRealize automation and reservation policy so that it knows how much resources it has to consume to do these things. Our logical templates in application services are going to map to a vRealize blueprint, which again maps to a vSphere template. So you need to have a vSphere template created so that you can create the vRealize automation blueprint so you can map the application services logical template to that blueprint. And again, that will deploy a virtual machine, put the application on top of that. And our application blueprint is everything we want laid on top of that virtual machine in order to install whichever components we need. So again, that stuff is all pretty well documented on my blog. I didn't want to go through that tonight and show you how to install software and not do anything with it. I wanted to actually go through and do a live demo of some other things. So if you are trying to get application services installed, start with the bit.ly/vxprt VRA series. That will walk you through getting vRealize Automation Center all set up. Once that's built, you can deploy application services and all the components will be in place to configure application services properly. With that, it's demo time. 27 minutes, 15 minutes for a demo. Yeah, all right, that's not too bad. It's 9:02.
Stop looking at the clock, man.
So, demo environment. What do I want to do first? So here we are. We're going to log into application services. So I've got two business groups created already in vRealize Automation, and I've configured one of those business groups here in application services. So I'm going to log in as my Luke user, who's part of my Star Wars business group. And this user, once we kick the deployment off, I'll go back through and show you some of the steps that we will use to configure, or things to check on in vRealize Automation, and then configure application services. So here is our vCloud Automation Center environment. This is already configured for this particular business group. And I have a blueprint here that I've created. So you can click on that, and it will show you information about your environment. As you can see here, I can create different versions. So if I'm going through, and this is version 1 of my product, I can have a version for that. I can have a version if I've upgraded from 1.0 to 1.5 or to 2 or to 1.01 to fix a bug or whatever that happens to be. If I click on this blueprint up in the corner here, this will actually take me into my drag and drop designer. So whatever I want to do, I can drag into this area that comes with several components already. I can bring scripts in. It's got services that are already defined. I can build my own services. These just happen to be what's already there. And it's as simple as dragging and dropping components. So in this environment, I've got a CentOS 6.4. This is the application services logical template, which is mapped to my vRealize Automation Center blueprint. If I wanted to add a second virtual machine to my environment, done. I've done that. If I wanted to install some service onto this application, let's drag MySQL over here. I can drag MySQL. And now obviously it's not that easy to install MySQL. There's other things that we need to do. I'll show you that in one second. So I don't want to do that. Cancel my changes there. All right, so here we are. This blueprint worked. I'm going to click on deploy. And I can give my deployment profile a name. When I do that, I select my business group. As luck would have it, I'm going to pick the one that worked for me last time. So this already has some things defined in this deployment profile. I'll map my deployment environment. So this is my logical template, which is mapped to my CentOS template in vCloud Automation Center. Here I can define things about my virtual machine. So, typically memory, one thing you're going to want to make sure of is that your blueprint allows you to use these values. So for example, in my particular blueprint that I have in vCloud Automation Center, I've maxed the amount of memory at 1 gig for the virtual machine. So if I tried to deploy this and I kept it as use blueprint value, it would fail because it wouldn't be able to provision the virtual machine within the restrictions I've placed on the vRealize Automation blueprint. So I've changed that to 1024 here. Name our host name. This gives you a somewhat vague error if you just left this blank about not being use blueprint value not able to be null or something along those lines, and it didn't quite click at first that I forgot to name my virtual machine, but obviously we want to name it. Here is the flow that we'll go through. So it's going to start the execution plan, provision the virtual machine, and it's going to work its way through all of the different components that I've asked application services to install. So here I need to disable SE Linux. I need to install certain packages so that I can do a yum install on some of these other components. We'll install these components and then hopefully get to the end. If you want to see what any particular item is doing, you can click on View Action Script, and it will show you the script that's in here. Again, this was just a script window. If we think back to the that drag and drop environment I was in, I just dragged a script item in there, and I just pasted this. I just pasted this script in here to disable SE Linux. So make a backup of my SE Linux config file, and then change it from permissive, which is what was in my template, to disabled. This actually hung me up quite a bit when I was first testing application services. So it would deploy the virtual machine, and then it would fail on installing some of these other components, and it was like SE Linux is enabled, and I was like, no, it's not. I never install SE Linux, but yeah, it was there and enabled. So I set it to converted the template back to a virtual machine, booted it up, changed SE Linux to permissive, thinking that would be good enough to get me by. There's a couple other steps you need to do to clean up the virtual machine. There's an initialization script that you need to run so that the application services agent will start. After we booted it up, it starts up, does some initial config. We want to wipe that so it's in a clean state.
Hey, we have some questions.
Yep.
Okay, so first one is VCAC passing the vCenter commands directly to vCenter or directly to the hypervisor?
To the virtual machine, I believe.
Okay. And let's see, you build apps, build app deploys for, say, example, Chrome to Windows VMs?
You could. Again, that's I don't know that I would use vCloud Automation Center to do more end-user computing type applications, but if, say, you needed Chrome on your web server, for example, I've ran into weird bugs where engineering has coded things that use some DLL that was part of a certain web browser in order to make things work. So, yeah, you could, if you needed to. This also supports Windows, so we could automate the installation of Chrome or specific browsers, or anything that can be scripted could be installed or should be able to be installed by application services. If I was doing that for desktops, like in a VDI environment, I don't know that this would be the tool I would use for that. Again, I'd probably use something like App Volumes or ThinApp or some third-party tool to manage my desktop applications. But if you probably could make it work in application services. That's one of those using the hammer to bang in a screw kind of thing.
And he asks, let's see, the more complex program, the longer the scripts, correct?
Yeah. And this is, I mean, if you look at, I'll close this for 1 second, but if you look how long this is a single virtual machine being deployed with Apache, RabbitMQ, and Postgres database. So I mean, that's a lot of scripts in here to do a fairly basic task in the grand scheme of the world, but this allows us to update that as we need. So when a new version of Apache comes out, we don't need to rebuild all of our virtual machine templates. We can just use a base operating system virtual machine template and update the scripts on top of that to deploy what we need to do, so we're not constantly in the state of maintaining virtual machines. Again, I'll go pick on another company I was at. Our QA group insisted on having virtual machine templates for every single version of the application that we had in production. So at one point I had somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or 40 virtual machine templates that people would deploy, because that's how they wanted to do it. If we had a tool like application services, I could keep my one virtual machine template, or maybe 2 or 3 depending on what my operating system requirements were as our application matured, and have different application blueprints that would do all the work on top of that. Became very difficult to manage, especially when, version 2.0, 3 months after it was in production, they found a bug and they wanted a 2.01, but then they only wanted to keep one version. It just became a nightmare to manage, and having a tool like this or some other automation tool would have made that process much easier. I mentioned earlier, trying to think about what it is that you're doing and your processes when you're introducing a new tool like this. So I was talking about this specific script that I added in my first time through. I had SE Linux enabled, and my first thought process was I'm managing my virtual machine, right? So I went in, I converted my template to a virtual machine again, I did some configuration changes, I converted it back into a template, realized that even in permissive mode, I was still having errors because SE Linux wasn't completely disabled. I was about to go in and convert that virtual machine or that template back to a virtual machine, and again I said, wait, I'm doing the thing that I don't want to do anymore, right? I don't want to be managing virtual machines. I don't want to care about virtual machines. I need to know what state they start in. I need to know how I want them to end up, and I want to use a tool like application services to put it in the state I want. So rather than converting that that template to a virtual machine again, I wrote this script to go in and change SE Linux to be disabled. As you can see here, and this is an option that's available in the drag and drop UI. I can check this box. It will reboot my virtual machine to make sure that that takes effect. So again, it's thinking about how you're doing things and how you're going to use this tool to be more efficient. So this, to me, is much more efficient than having to maintain templates all the time. Maybe in another application I deploy, maybe I need SE Linux enabled. Maybe I don't want it in permissive mode. Same thing, I don't need to maintain another virtual machine template. I can simply add a script to do what I want, put the virtual machine into the configuration state that I want, and move on with doing more interesting things. Back here. Here's my review of everything that it's going to do. I can make sure I've got everything right here, or I can back up a step or two to make any changes I need. I've got 2 buttons down here on the lower right. I've got Publish and Deploy. I'm going to use Deploy right now, but the Publish button will actually take this application blueprint and make it available in vCloud Automation Center, so that my non-application architects don't have to log into a separate UI to request applications. So if I log into vCloud Automation Center here, and I'm not sure I've ever updated this particular one, so that's why I'm running it from application services tonight, which I probably should have made time to fix, but here we are at 9:14. If I come into my catalog, I can see all of my templates. So this is my generic CentOS template, which is the logical template that application services is using. This is my application services blueprint. So it's one spot I can come into, request this environment, and it will pull the application blueprint that I built in application services. So with that, I am going to hit the deploy button. And then we're going to go take a look at some other vCloud Automation Center things. You can see here my deployment scheduled. In a few seconds, this should kick off, and my machine will get really, really slow. You can see here now I've got my little spin wheel. Let's get to some green so I can move on and feel comfortable that this is doing something. Deployment is scheduled.
While that's going, we have a question.
Shoot.
So the RPM and installs are stored on the data store?
They are it depends. So they wouldn't be on a data store. They could be on a network share. You could create like in this case, I guess, a local Yum repository to do that. You could store the installation files on the template, but that would seem to be inefficient. So I probably have, in the case of Linux, a Yum repository that I was managing, or I think in the scripts I can show. Do I have those handy? Of course. I don't have one. What was I doing that with? I was doing that with Ansible. Sorry, thinking about something else. I can control which versions of the software I want to install. So if there's a very specific version of MySQL or Postgres or some other application I want to install, I can set up a Yum repository or find some other way to force that installation from happening from a public repository. So again, if you can script it, you can automate it in application services. This execution plan window down here will give you a little bit of insight as to what is going on, and also handy if you do run into errors. So it auto refreshes every now and again, which is mildly annoying, but that's okay. So you can see here that my node is being set up, and if I come into vCenter, you can see here that I've got a clone virtual machine action going, which again is my vSphere template, which is my vRealize automation blueprint, which is my logical template in application services. So it's doing a clone of that virtual machine here and has created the test web for virtual machine, which is the name I gave in the application services blueprint. So it's doing some work in the background now. I've got a 1 gig connection to my Synology, so it's not super fast, so it's going to take a few minutes to do this deployment. While that's going, I wanted to look a little bit at some of the things you need to do in vCloud Automation Center in order to enable application services to be working. So you need to have it installed. You need to have your business groups set up. So again, I've got 2 business groups in my environment, one Star Wars, one called Walking Dead. So my Luke user is in my Star Wars group, and I've got a user named Rick in my Walking Dead group. So if I were to log in to application services now as a user in my Walking Dead, XPRT, and yes, I know you can't see what I'm doing right now. That's okay. I will fix that in one moment. Hopefully the deployment doesn't fail while I do this, because that would be embarrassing. So if I log in as Rick right now, which I've not configured application services for this particular business group yet, I wouldn't have access to anything. Rick's not an application architect. I'm not going to be able to configure our application services to do anything as this user right now. So you can come in here. I still see these generic blueprints that I imported, but one of the things I need to do is to define a cloud provider. I can't do that right now as a user in my Walking Dead business group. So we log out here, and I want to come back in here. So again, my business group's already created, and I need to create reservations for that business group. So in order to create a reservation, I am going to log in. Who am I going to log in as? My IAS user, administrator. So if I come over to my infrastructure tab and reservations, I'll need to make sure that that business group has a reservation policy created. So once this page loads, sorry, it's so slow. You can see what's going on there. So this is my my 8-core 32 gig home lab build. I've got all of this running plus several virtual machines inside the vSphere environment. So I've got 3 SXI hosts, my vCenter, my domain controller, my IaaS server. I guess I got to shut that off and that off. And that off. I probably should have done that beforehand. So sorry that I'm running a bit resource constrained right now, but that's why this has taken a little while, because all of those virtual machines are waiting on this one CPU. This worked much faster when I was testing it earlier and not deploying an application in the background. Maybe I'll punt on this.
So, John, it seems like you didn't make your sacrifice like you should have, right?
Yes, I definitely should have sacrificed something and or bought more boxes. Hey, there we go, reservation policies. So you can see I've got reservation policies already defined for Star Wars and Walking Dead. The person deploying this right now is Luke, obviously, or hopefully, obviously, I guess Luigi. Ah, there we go. Yep, an error occurred. Unable to find. Test web 4 may have been rejected or deleted. So the live demo failed, but it's a vBrownbag, so what else is new? So let's punt on this for a moment and see why that failed. We saw it creating the, so we can come in here, we can see that it failed, and we can look at the view logs. I have no idea what that means. Starting provision request, an error occurred. CloudOS 64 unable to find VM test web 4 may have been rejected or deleted. So why would that have been deleted?
Someone made the comment, if you used G.I. Joe as a business group, it would go a lot faster.
It probably would. But then there was potential for lasers and things blowing up, and I guess with Star Wars things would blow up. And I guess I did name the Active Directory group that I gave permission to Alderaan, so that's probably not a good sign for things blowing up.
The other comment was, why are you using Workstation?
Because I've just got this one box right now, so I am presenting and demoing from Windows 8.1, which is installed on the box, which is running Workstation, which is running all of the various components. I was fighting my way through on an old dual-core Dell, and I realized that I had this awesome box sitting in the corner, and I could probably do most of what I needed to do in Workstation. Obviously create some limitations, but for the most part has worked. I'm wondering if I didn't run into a timeout issue, because you can see here the clone's still going on. So why don't we try to... So this failed, which is sad. But if we can go to resume here. Let's see if this picks back up. If not, I promise to record a demo that is working. It theoretically should pick up at
John, are you able to do this? Are you able to do this with nested ESXi?
Yes. So I've been doing this all along with nested ESXi. My nested ESXi host, so you can see here, this is my vCenter that's in Workstation, and my different virtual ESXi hosts. Test web 4 here is running it finished again. I think I might have just bumped into a timeout issue maybe, where it wanted it finished a bit sooner and gave me an error. This is my vCloud Automation Center appliance, my application services appliance that I've deployed. So completely nested environment, and has worked for me now 50% of the time. I'm going to see if I can resume this from here. It's going to try to redeploy the virtual machine, I think, again, which is now actually there. So I don't think this is going to work. But I may have I may have a blog post scheduled tomorrow that shows the screenshots of all of this process working. So we can see the node details here. This is going to pick back up. It looks like it may be trying to deprovision my So apologies for the failed demo, but how did I get rid of that? Yay, prizes! Don't forget the prizes.
Is that your smoke and mirrors type?
Yep. So there's a reason I presented today. Worst case scenario, all anyone's going to remember is the fact that we're giving away a lot of cool prizes. So no one's going to remember that the demo failed, except it will be recorded on iTunes and on the professionalvmware.com site next week sometime. So everyone will be able to see me failing over and over and over and over again. And I will attach a link to my blog post that shows all of it working, which wasn't smoke and mirrors. It actually deployed. Did I delete the deployment earlier? So here was the one that ran. Again, exact same blueprint that ran. This was a teardown. So after my virtual machine and all my applications were deployed, I came in and I selected to do a teardown operation, which removes the virtual machine from the environment. You'd want to manage that through application services so that things don't get out of sync. Otherwise, you end up with something like this going on, where application services is trying to do something to a virtual machine that doesn't exist anymore, but I was getting antsy waiting for it and deleted it from vSphere instead of letting application services do its thing. So now I've got some sort of database out of sync issue, I assume, and I've got to go figure out how to fix that.
Yeah, that's a big no-no, by the way, even in VCAC or vRealize Automation, right?
You don't want to do much in the vSphere client anymore. If you're using vCloud Automation Center or vRealize Automation, you want to do your work through there, because if your database gets out of sync, you'll be a sad panda, sadder than having a demo fail on a live vBrownbag.
It is a pain, by the way, to go in and fix the database. I spent many hours doing that. I got it finally to work, but it would have been quicker to actually redeploy within VCAC than to deal with the database.
Probably. Yeah, so it looks like it's trying to deprovision my virtual machine, which it seems to be fairly unsuccessful at, because it's, oh no, it's gone. Delete virtual machine. So it's gone. Well, it's doing that. Let's go and try to free up some resources. Yes, I just did that. Off, 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 off. Hyper-V's off. Okay. I did add a Hyper-V reservation recently. I shouldn't be trying to use that, though. So it does still think it's deprovisioning. I'm probably not going to keep you all here for another bare minimum of 15 minutes, which is what it takes to deploy the template. Take my word that it worked, since I showed you the teardown deployment. So it had to have worked if I tore it down, right? I'll have a blog post tomorrow going through what I showed you here. You know what, actually, while this is still failing, we skipped a couple of the demo pieces, but I can kind of show you the application blueprint a bit more closely. So these three components here, when I was building it, were all services that already existed. You can see exactly what it's going to do. So if you were trying to do maybe an older version or a newer version of one of these predefined services, you can come in here and look at the scripts to see what it's actually doing in the background. So you can see here one of the steps for deploying this was to check whether SD Linux was enabled or not. So had I actually read that, I would have known I needed to have SD Linux disabled in the first place. Once I figured that out, I came in here, created a script on my own, which very simply is just a text editor here, so I can add other things in here, write other scripts, make these scripts as simple or as complex as I want. I'm personally a fan of more simple scripts, so I would probably want a script to do a thing. And if I needed to have many things done, I would probably drag multiple script windows in versus having to maintain one or update a really long, scary-looking script, especially if I want to turn this over to support staff later. So you can see here I had my disable Linux one, this to pull down an RPM. So again, I could have put that all in one script, but I wanted this to do a specific thing. So installing, and then apparently there's a problem with this repo right now. So I had to disable HTTPS for it in order for it to pull down all the information properly. So in my OCD world, that's a thing that I have to do for the thing, so it's one script to me. It's all one thing to make it work. If I had 4 or 5 other things, I would continue to do that here. These are just installing the application components, right? So this is just installing Apache. Apache is pretty useless by itself without an application on there. Postgres is fairly useless without being configured. So if I needed to create some SQL scripts to create my database, I could do that here. That's it's not compatible. I could just create my Postgres scripts to do my database creation work, add users, whatever I needed to do to actually prepare my application. If I needed to install Git, for example, so that I could pull down packages off of GitHub, that's where I have my application installed, I could do that here as well. So that's application services. I'm guessing by now the deployment has not fixed itself. In progress. Virtual, yeah, it's pretty hung up right now, so I don't think I will have successfully deployed that tonight. So apologies there. 9:32. Doesn't look like we got by that. Are there any other questions that anyone has for the guy that can't make application services work?
Not really. Don't see any.
I wouldn't want to ask me any questions right now either.
I could ask you some questions.
I think there was one about prizes, John.
Prizes, yes. Prizes are on. I mean, we've got some great prizes for the, thank you. We've got some great prizes coming up for the community. If you missed that at the beginning of the show, I'm sure that's what the Twitters are filled with right now. That and folks probably making fun of me.
No. You're actually, you're doing really good, man.
Cool. Thanks. Like I said, I got a blog post coming up tomorrow detailing building the application blueprint that I used and deploying it. Worst case scenario, you can choose to believe my screenshots or not, but they did all work. I did not doctor any of them up, so it did deploy. But I guess that's it for tonight.
So there's actually 2 things. One, Larry Smith says, do you actually know what you're doing?
No. I am not. If you recall from one of my first slides, I am not an expert. My lines are not all perpendicular, and I only have one in transparent ink. So I'm getting there, but this is a learning process for me just as much as anything else.
And Sean wants to know what the specs of your workstation box are.
The workstation box is 8-core AMD, which, if we did not mention it, since my deployment failed, we have a bunch of prizes. The ClearPath prize is actually built with that same 8-core processor and 32 gigs of RAM. So I've got quite a bit crammed into this box right now, as you can see. I've run Ansible on it. Got some other Linux machines that I use for testing, the templates that I've done all my cloning from, and then bad BCP, be expert person for not using the web client right now, but because I'm so tight on resources, I would normally love the web client in this case, but a little bit lighter to use the good old C# client for this. And you can see I've got virtual machines that are actually running inside my nested ESXi host. So I've got my application services VM running inside my nested ESXi VM and my vRealize or vCloud Automation Center appliance running inside that environment as well, plus my templates.
Wow.
And it's pretty tame when it's not doing much work, right? So I mean, I've got Chrome open I'll see if this scares anybody, but here's all my Chrome tabs that are open at one time, so Firefox is probably using like a gig of memory. Oh yeah, look at that, 1.4 gigs of memory. So all my, it's quite a beefy box and can do, it's handled this workload, it's handled managing templates and running other scripts that I've been testing all along through the VDM 30 and 30 month we did last month, so my entire build was on this. Now I absolutely see why my demo failed now. Thanks, Luigi, for saying my live demo was actually working with no problems. He jinxed it.
I called it. So there is a request. Could you possibly send instructions on how to set up your lab, at least at a high level?
Yep, all on. They are. I will tweet those out with the follow-up posts, but they are all on my blog. If you just search for 8-core on vertexpert.com, you should find the build post, the part list I used, installing it. I did at one point have ESXi installed on bare metal on here, and then I switched over to Workstation, but that is all there. But I'll also include those links when we publish the homework and the follow-up.
I'm sorry, but Luigi chimed in and said they are all on nerdblurt.com.
Yes, they are also on nerdblurt.com. Thankfully, he at least links back over to my blog now.
Okay. If there's
you
no other,
be happy that I showed my live Twitter feed. Anyone want to embarrass me right now? Nobody? Oh, those are kind of embarrassing. All right, I'll move those back.
Is there any more questions? Okay. If there's no more questions, I'm going to at least stop the recording.
That sounds like a good idea. Thanks everyone for watching my failed demo tonight.
Okay, and I'm now